Welcome to Public Space, a community dedicated to supporting individuals who have experienced religious trauma or find themselves in between and are looking for self-God as well as community. We exist beyond the four walls of colonized religion. Here, we create a safe and vibrant space where members can explore and share spirituality, stories, art, and intellectual inquiry through critical dialogue. Join us as we embark on a journey of healing, self-discovery, and creative expression. Together, we will foster a supportive community that empowers individuals to reclaim their voice, embrace their unique journeys, embody a Path-Maker Archetype, and find solace and strength in the company of like-minded individuals.
Greetings, Pathmakers, and welcome to Season 2. The trail is different, and what we're packing and what we're sharing this season is different as well. This season, we plan to have more engaging dialogues with individuals while off path. So enjoy the following dialogue, as it may inform you and add to your toolkit while you trek life beyond religion, especially colonized religion. See you out there. Welcome, Lizzie. To get straight into it, tell us a little bit about yourself and then a little bit about the project.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name's Lizzie Goldsmith. And yeah, I'm based in Colorado, in Denver. I'm a podcast producer, writer. And yeah, this project is an audio drama podcast, which is a bit of a unicorn even in that space, in that it's an adaptation of a spiritual memoir. The book it's based on is called When We Were on Fire, a memoir of consuming faith, tangled love, and starting over. The book is in 4 parts, and the audio drama podcast is in 4 parts. And, depending on when this airs, at the point we're recording, 2 episodes are out of the 4 on podcast apps. But yeah, it was an incredible podcast experience adaptation to work on, and I'm so excited to talk about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. We had the honor of actually listening to all 4 parts, but to my knowledge, not all 4 parts are publicly available right now. But please follow the link that will be in the description to start the journey of listening and experiencing this amazing project. And it's, 4 parts. It's up to part 2 right now, correct?
Up to part 2, yeah, and each part is only about 20 to 25 minutes. I know that with audio drama, it can be, you know, it's not a medium that everybody is familiar with, and especially when it's associated with the word book, I've had just a lot of people think, "Oh, it's the length of an audiobook," and it's not. It's only about an hour and a half total once all 4 parts are out, and so kind of very easy entry, I would say.
Yeah, it is. It is. And, for me, someone who's interested in theopoetics and symbols and reimagining and reinterpreting and even deconstructing and reconstructing, this project really brought to my mind these ideas of, how they use fire,
Mhm.
like how it can be like sort of this double-edged sword, and I love how through the drama that we see the both sides of the fire symbolically, right?
Yeah.
And I just love, do you have any thoughts on that? Just the using of the symbolism and imagery of fire in this kind
Yeah.
of piece.
I guess to unpack it a little bit, when we were on fire, it's talking about like being on fire for God in the evangelical in the 90s and WWJD, kind of a faith deconstruction context. And I think that title, I've encountered some people who like they don't even need the subtitle or me to describe it. As soon as they hear when we were on fire, they're like, that really that pulls me back to like like feeling and, like the word like consuming faith is in there, right? Like that imagery continues. I feel like it like is it's very evocative just on its own, but also if you come from that context, I think of like it's gotta be like all or nothing, right? Like, I don't know, I'm someone who also grew up evangelical. And so, I grew up with those Bible verses of like, you gotta be hot or cold and like, be spat out if you're not either and sort of thing. I think definitely that's not something that, like, you know, I don't wanna say it was, like, just a 90s thing, it certainly was not, it was before and it was since then, but I think definitely in certain contexts, it really kind of got to, like, this fever pitch where it's like, we gotta, like, almost, like, lose sight of yourself, like, kind of burn away yourself almost to, like, be this vessel sort of thing, and, think some people see that as a good thing, I don't see that as a good thing. The author saw didn't see that as a good thing either, kind of looking at her upbringing too. And, my upbringing is similar to the author's in some ways, is different in others. But yeah, like that, I did a missions trip, in my post college years and like very much had that like, you gotta be all in. You gotta be all in or it doesn't count sort of thing. So I related. I don't remember what I thought when I first saw the title of the book, if it was my friend's recommendation more or, but it's definitely a title that I feel like, you know, was very well chosen and like for what it talks about. So yeah, I think that's where I go kind of when I think of it cuz like that insidery language, right, of being on fire is you don't realize it's insidery, I think. But then, you know, the concept of being consumed by something or other is not always insidery either.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I love how the author and the drama goes through this kind of God is in the silence,
Mhm.
like the moment of being told God will heal, God is near, juxtaposed, to absence of felt, this deep familiarity for people, and do you have any thoughts on that? Because for me, I have a ton of thoughts
Mm,
on that in terms of my own experiences when
yeah.
thinking about, where is God
Mhm.
and these things when we're going through these things.
Yeah. No, I've thought a lot about because it was after college that I really started my deconstruction journey, and when I think about college, I went to a college. I think a lot about those, like, moments where I was just like, "Where are you, God?" And, like, just, like, so wanting to hear from God and thinking it was my fault that I wasn't. And, I think part of that was why like, part of that, like, kind of, you know, really, like, desperate need to find God, like, kind of kept me maybe from deconstructing, like, so long because it was just like, "Well, I must be doing something wrong there," right? Because like, you know, if God's not showing up, then, like and God's perfect, right? Then, like, it must be me, and what do I not want God enough, or do I not want, X, Y, or Z, or why am I not having this experience that, like, my friends and family maybe are having. I don't know, it's being on the other side of it now, it's like I think it's, like, such a beautiful concept to think of, like, but the silence doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? Just because it's not, like, this emotional fervor, like, intensity, like, high, doesn't mean there's nothing happening. Like, even if it's not the thing that I thought it was, like, I'm very much in a post deconstructed place, but not someone who is like, and obviously it's my experience is my experience, but it's like where I consider myself kind of like Christian flavored agnostic, where like the traditions that I grew up with will always have some kind of influence on how I see the world, and where I find meaning. Even if I don't know exactly where the literal truth is and don't really even need to know that, which does feel like a gift to not, because the kind of like must have answers, must have certainty, like can be so powerful and so pervasive. And at least at this point in my life, I feel okay not having answers and like being in that in between. But yeah, it is what is it like with the silence? Like, even with like, I don't know, in a completely different context, like paranormal experiences, like a friend of mine and I went to this like haunted hotel, like the Stanley Hotel in Colorado a few years ago, where we stayed in a haunted room. And like she's someone who'd had these experiences before, and she like had all these feelings when we were in the place, and I didn't feel anything. And I was like, which is kind of how the sort of experiences have been, being very intellectualized. And, obviously I don't bring any judgment to myself on that, but sometimes it's, I try not to, but it can be like, oh, like, why do other people, even now, like, why do other people have some certain experiences and why do I not? Coming to terms with silence then, silence now, and just like what that looks like going forward is a journey.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up. You made me think of voice, shame, the act of naming, things, and how that in that process of religious trauma and post, healing and everything, giving name to things helps you understand things, helps you formulate some sort of perspective, right? So, like you just mentioned, two individuals, same space, given the same myth as a background, setting the tone, but just experienced it differently.
Yeah.
It is confusing at first, but like you said, when we realize we don't always have to know
Mhm.
everything, maybe you're just not meant to understand or know right now.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's enough. So
Yeah.
I agree with what you
Yeah.
said.
Well, and even the just certain things can cause harm for others and not, can be benefit. Like I was actually just talking to my mom yesterday who was, still Christian and we get along quite well despite that, which I'm very grateful for and we were able to have open dialogues. But I think there is just kind of this understanding gap sometimes because it's been her faith has been something that has been like almost exclusively a comfort to her, like a source of clarity and answers. And, to me, it's been, like not as much of that. It's kind of been like a source of stress and like striving and trying and failing and feel, all these things that kind of come from that. And I think kind of we do hit points where we're like, you know what, like, she told me yesterday, she was like, I'm so sorry that the thing that, has helped me, like, has brought you pain, like, that brings me pain too, to hear that, and so it was very validating to have that recognized, 'cause, when you have 2 totally different experiences of the same thing, it can be easy to discount one person's and, like, "Oh, they're doing something wrong," or, like, "I'm doing something wrong," one of those things, and I think being able to, like, hold that tension is healthy, like, for interpersonal communication and just for self-understanding too.
Yes, of course, of course. Yeah. And in my limited experiences with religion and particularly Christianity, growing up, we tried different denominations.
Mm,
They were similar, but
mhm.
different.
Yeah.
And seeing things, hearing things, and then wondering why it's not happening in my direct life that way, like struggled with that. Like, am I
Yeah.
really like doing this wrong or am I
Yeah.
really like marked by something? Like, it's like this feeling of not only shame, but guilt, like,
Yeah.
and I think that is very heavy and it crushes us,
Yeah.
especially those who are trying to make a life sometimes beyond religion or,
Mhm.
beyond the wounds that religion have inflicted.
Yeah.
It's very heavy, and when we get to that point of letting most of that go, like life does feel better, because I remember thinking like that, being burdened by that. Like, and I think a lot of this pushes us to conform a lot of times, I think sometimes people want to go and escape, but they just don't know how. So they go back in and, we can't heal where we were hurt. So
Mm,
they just kind of endure that, and then it becomes numb. And
mm,
then argumentatively, it becomes a little psychotic, right?
mm,
Like somebody's cutting you and you just don't feel that. Like, what? So like it raises the question of like, where's the humanity in this, right? Like, where's the human factor at least? Like I've been hurt. There's feelings involved. There's feelings that have not been communicated. There's feelings that have not been acknowledged.
mhm.
And then on a worser case, there's actions that have not been acknowledged. There's several cases like that. And so, it's just hard when God is involved in all aspects of this, like,
Mm,
theoretically, logically, spiritually, and us in our private spaces asking, what have we done wrong or how have we fallen short to be, I guess in traditional Christian language favored, you
Mm.
know, where God condones, what
Mm.
you're
Mhm.
doing and supports it. I think that's where we get that whole kind of slang of saying we are highly favored, we're chosen
Hashtag
people.
blessed.
Right, hashtag blessed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like I think that subliminally those break down to those kind of meanings, like God supports or condones what I'm doing, you know? Like we can even really quickly see this with the start of slavery in America, early
Mm.
America.
Mhm.
Slavery was condoned through the church because it was helping the chosen people, and
Mm.
and then they justified in their mind saying, God said we should do this to help us, to prosper, and so it's just interesting how we can take things and then build a relationship with God with it and say, this is okay, but then
Yeah.
say, this is not okay.
Yeah, no, the way religion has and continues to be used to support all sorts of bad things, is such a like, obviously it's very toxic, but then because when you add that theological, like, divine stamp to it, like, that will, like, give a lot of people, like, license to be okay with it, and or dismiss it, or maybe not think as critically as they would if, like, it was not kind of wrapped and cloaked in that spiritual, like, language. I don't know, you could take it, I mean, there are a lot of cases of, like, things getting taken too far outside of religion, but I think when it is in religion, and especially if it's more of like a theocracy or something where it just like it gets really messy, the religion, like where religion leaves off, where politics begins, or where Christianity, religion is in power, then that's like a lot of red flags, a lot more of a license to just kind of baptize our own desires with the divine. So yeah, I think it's also interesting sometimes, like on the opposite side, on the individual level, sometimes you can think, I think I've encountered where people think, because I want this, God must want the opposite. And so you can get in this like never really like feeling allowed to be happy or allowed to be yourself, because it's like, oh well, if I want it, like what does God actually want? And sure, sometimes you can kind of get into the like where y kind of you write that narrative of God aligns with what you think, but then sometimes you're you're the opposite, where it's just is like, well, you know, God must want the opposite because like that's what feels really hard and right now, and those gymnastics we do are really interesting. How you kind of go one way and veer the other way.
Yeah, that's true. Like creating this spectrum of or duality, of just good and bad and right and wrong, and God is always choosing right, good,
Mhm.
pure. I can go on with these synonyms and symbols, but you get it. Like
Mhm.
when you have, for me, in my experiences, we think it's really harmful when a group of people or an institution or an organization sits there and sets the tone and says what God wants. And it's like, how do you know?
Mhm.
Like what kind of special communication do you have that,
Yeah.
I don't have or we don't have? Like, how are you talking faster and more secure with God
Mm.
than the rest of us? Like, it becomes a little problematic because now you have to trust
Mhm.
what they're saying is true. And then if that narrative leads you to harm and, you
Mm.
know, bondage and sickness and poverty, then it's like, does God want this for me? Is that what you're
Mm.
telling me? You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? Like Jehovah Witness, I get into this issue of how did you come up with these numbers? Like I'm all
Mm.
for numerology, but how is it that there's an exact number of going
Yeah.
with God versus staying behind and being sacrificed? Like
Mm.
where do we get this from and how is this healthy for our spiritual growth, our communal growth?
Yeah, well, and it just came up again in like the concept of the rapture, and that's been something over the decades that someone will always have found out the day that Jesus is coming back, and the rapture being a very new concept theologically, but one that a lot of people have kind of latched onto. And some of those like dates that people were like got really into it were before my time, and then of course it came up again like a month or so ago, and it's just is kind of it's kind of bizarre too because that is also very like where do you get that? I read that part of the Bible too, and it said no one knows that here, and so but we cling, we crave certainty, and I think a lot of people crave like an escape to. And, I worked for a Christian radio station for a bit, and I was struck by how many songs there were. And, this was a Christian radio station that was very conservative and catered towards, I think, quite an older audience, but like that there's so many songs of like going away to heaven and, all this stuff. And it just felt very like, well, what about what's happening now? Like that's, you know, I get that life is like the world is hard, but like, you don't want to shut our eyes to the kind of the things that are happening now. That's kind of where we get into a lot of issues in the first place, I think, is, only having that tunnel vision and not taking care of the world that we're in. Anyways, going off on a bit of a tangent there, but yeah, no, it's all these things have consequences and outcomes, whether they're intended or not.
Yeah, what you're saying really resonates and it makes me think of belonging beyond belief,
Hmm.
and this comes up in the drama, and it's really interesting because it's a very challenging question that's echoing in anyone's mind that has dared to step beyond,
Hmm.
the Bible, beyond the doctrines, beyond physical sacred spaces like churches. And that is, where does one belong when belief dissolves? This is very important because I think we all, as practitioners, struggle with this concept of, faith, belief. What do we believe?
Hmm.
We can sit here and all pledge allegiance, but do we believe in the words that we're
Hmm.
talking about? Do we believe in the things
Yeah.
that are being said or mentioned? It becomes a completely different thing. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's something that really it came to the fore. So, like, my deconstruction started on like off the floor of a church in England where we were on evangelism week and this missions trip. It really was that question of like, do I really believe these things that I'm trying to get other people to believe? Because I think it was just the oversaturation of like all of these like teens descending on this one city to do all this mission stuff is just like it really brought up all these questions that I really hadn't fully looked in the face yet. And because like so much of I had so many assumptions of like of course I believe X, Y, and Z, and just and then you just you end up I think the system I grew up in kind of was built on keeping me from asking that existential question as long as possible, which a lot of these are, you kind of are when you're growing up in it, but we do come to all these different conclusions. I'm talking as the person who, I adapted this book. I resonated a lot with it. But I'm not the author, and so like, her story is different from my story. Where she's landed is different from where I've landed, and same with, the actor who portrayed her. We're all kind of at different places. So obviously I don't wanna, like, say that what I'm saying right now is necessarily kind of aligns with her beliefs or, anybody who was involved in the project other than myself or, I think that's the beautiful thing about this audio drama is that it really feels like a starting place, I think me as someone who has taken steps this way, someone else may have taken steps another way, there's those points of connection that I'm glad we're getting to talk about some of them today, and, I think everyone will bring different things to the listening experience, and I think that's really beautiful. When I read your kind of thoughts about it, I was like, "Oh, these are really beautiful," and, like, some of these things I had thought of, and I was like, "I hope people get this." And others, I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, I hadn't thought about that in quite that way," and just like but, like, I put so much love into it and so much of my own story too, and so I'm like, makes sense that kind of that came through. So, yeah, the story is such a beautiful way to really connect with people and to really, like, engage with these questions, and I love it.
Yeah, definitely. Listening and just experiencing this piece, this project, it brought back for me so many memories of my own journey. And
Mm,
most times we're so focused on going forward,
mhm.
that we rarely look back at where we came from and what we experienced and what we felt. And going back through it, I was like, oh yeah, I felt like that. I remember feeling something like that. Like,
Yeah,
wow, you know.
yeah. I mean, you
So
can't stay in an existential crisis forever, so I think the people who like me have who've like really had these like really intense times where it's just been like holding, the cognitive dissonance and struggling with being on the precipice of things. And when you get to a point where you can like set it down for a while, it's so needed and it's such a like a breath of fresh air. For me that happened when I moved to Colorado and was in a completely different context and I could kind of breathe a little bit more. And so then it's really interesting, coming back to it from a safer vantage point years later. And I put content warnings on this because we're all at different. I leaned into more content warnings perhaps than fewer because we're all in different places and something that like triggers one person may not for another person, but yeah, I it's been very interesting for me re-engaging with it since it's been a little while since I've made it, between when I made it and when it's now getting out into the world. And so yeah, I know I'm gonna be doing more thinking too and reflecting in the coming months, and I welcome that opportunity.
yeah, yeah. We're always talking about how people sharing their experiences is very helpful. Like, even in the traditional Christian church, the language that's used is testimonies, right? Testimonies are
Yeah.
always powerful, right? And I just feel like using that language, this drama series is a series of testimonies, right?
Mhm.
Like her memoirs is her own life experiences. But
Yeah.
when we hear other people's testimonies, that truly is the gospel. When you think about it, the good news, that's what it
Mm,
means, right? The gospel. The good news is, this person survived this and
mm,
allowed, themselves to be able to share it. And then here we are learning from it. Or
yeah.
if not just learning from it, we're resonating with it. Like
Mhm.
it becomes something that sort of like a probe, and it's floating in space and time, and anyone that comes upon it, it just brings about these sort of feelings and these sort of ideas about religious trauma. And I love how, like, this is not about church bashing.
Mhm.
Like, this
Mhm.
is about human experience, right? This is
Yeah.
not taking away from the church, but it is highlighting something that happened in, around, and among the church, and
Mhm.
how the church has played a part. You know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
in the realm of religious trauma, there's a lot of blaming, right?
Mm.
Because they're in
Mhm.
this stage of healing where, they need to blame someone to make it make sense, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. And so, saying that, would you be able to share a little bit about where you are in your process, on your journey of healing and then making sense of things between you and God, your own faith, your own spirituality? Like, how
Mm.
has this process been for you, for, rebuilding and, you know,
Mhm.
picking up new things that are considered maybe, sin or not
Mm.
allowed or sanctioned by God? Come to find out it's God, but just in a different way.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
what are your experiences like?
Yeah. So I've talked a little bit kind of about my story, but just to like in a more of a nutshell, grew up evangelical in a first generation evangelical family. Pretty legalistic at the time. Glad like my parents have bounced back and so we have that relationship, but yeah, it was definitely a very small world that I grew up in as a homeschooler for my first 12 or 13 years, then in a small Christian high school, then in a Christian college. And, it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s where I kind of was really outside of that context, both kind of at work and friend groups and things like that. My journey I feel like has been side by side with like kind of mental health components. I think that's something that I really resonated with this book in particular when it came out, because it was like it's so vulnerable. Like, there are a lot of memoirs, maybe fewer at the time it came out, but there are a lot of memoirs about people's faith shifts. But like the level of honesty that the author was able to like share about her, I'm like, I get that. Because like another reason like I feel like I didn't engage with like, deconstruction, or like kind of let myself go there, was because I was so depressed in college, was because I was like just trying so hard on so many different levels to like succeed, or be seen in a certain way, or like in younger years like win the Sunday school prizes. Like it was a very external faith, it was a very external form of relating to people. And yeah, I mean, I think it started like the Bible, I think, was the first relationship to change for me in terms of like, it's okay if I don't, if it's not literal. It's okay if it's not literal. It doesn't mean it has no meaning. It doesn't mean it has no value. It doesn't mean that none of it's, like it's okay. And so that was a really freeing thing to experience. I think like when I think about it, I think, like, maybe there were times like, kind of with the writers of the Bible where they did tap into like this universal truth. And I think it got like really probably lost in the culture, just like we lose things in our own culture of, like those contexts and everything. But like every so often, like I would read something, I was like, this feels like, you know, that it transcends culture in a way. And of course, like I can only speak from my own culture reading into it, and I think that's kind of where we hit a lot of issues with trying to read into, because it is a very old book. But yeah, I would, resonate with those moments. Like maybe there is, something here, even if, like, and maybe that's in every, like a lot of religions too, where like there maybe is a lot of, I don't want to say clutter, like, cause I don't want to like kind of disrespect anyone who belongs to any of these religions, but like there is a lot of cultural like context and so much history in so many of these ancient religions. Like there seem to be these nuggets, right? That you can kind of that are have this commonality, right? So I think that, and just like kind of the mysteries of life. Like I had this experience about 10 years ago where like I was part of this, like it was like this evangelical web conference thing, and I was kind of in the deconstruction phase. I was like, I don't know what I think about all this, but I was like, what do I believe? What do I believe? And I was like, well, I believe in love, and I believe in beauty, and I believe in mystery. And, like, that's all I could get to at that point, and I was like, "That's enough for me right now," because, like, I don't know, like, I don't think I could ever be. I said this at the time, and I think it's still true, like, having a fully naturalistic view of the world is just not something I ever see myself getting to. I feel like even if I never figure out exactly why there's mystery, or why like we recognize and value beauty, apart from kind of our evolutionary instincts, or even if I don't get the answers, or don't like, you know, you know, know why why we love, like I I feel like choosing to believe in these things that transcend myself, and that, it is the thing that has stayed, I think. And I don't know, in terms of what that looks like, I'm not someone. I don't really read the Bible right now, I don't pray, I journal sometimes. I mentioned a little earlier, I can over intellectualize things quite a bit. And, I feel like it's very I'm a very all or nothing person, where I'm either feeling all of my feelings all at once and it's too much. So I'm like, nope. And then I am not feeling much for a while. And it's you know so recognizing the patterns is good. That's always the first step. And so I feel like kind of my next step of my journey, because like I had sort of experiences last year where my life was like I was feeling all my feelings, and like not always in very healthy ways, but like, you know, I did appreciate having like that more access, that I didn't always allow myself to go there. And I'm like, okay, my next step is that I do want to engage more, right? Like I do want to, you know, if I feel sad, I want to be able to like sit in it and not like try to like numb it. Coping mechanisms exist for a reason, and I'm so glad I have them. maybe they're not the healthiest, but they're not the least healthy. Like, we need them, coping mechanisms at some point. There comes a point where I do wanna be able to, like, sit with my feelings and talk about them and, like, you know yeah, be able and not just think about I think that's why therapy has been so hard for me to engage with because I just will talk and talk and talk about my feelings instead of feeling them, and I'm like, "Ah, I wanna feel my feelings," like that like, in terms of where that fits in with God, how I would define God these days, like, I don't know that I could say much more than, like, love and beauty and mystery other than the fact that the Christian flavored agnostic that I mentioned. I walked the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage in Spain several years ago. And like, even though I didn't walk it for spiritual reasons, I was in a pretty similar place religiously as I am now. I knew that, like, you know, I felt more of that spiritual connection than I would have if it had been, a pilgrimage from a different religious tradition, just because I had that background and I had that, like all the songs I knew growing up are Christian and, some of them are pretty cheesy and there are some other like beautiful hymns that I'm glad I got to know and learn. So I think I am in a kind of a interesting middle ground of a place where I can definitely point to things that caused harm in my life, like a purity culture, just like a really legalistic all or nothing ethos. But then, other things where like there was also good, right? Like, I grew up with these Christian radio dramas that, like, if I hadn't grown up with them, I wouldn't have made this audio drama, and this audio drama was incredibly meaningful personally for me. And so I'm grateful that I can it's like a little bit of both and, like, maybe not as much as I would like, but some, but some. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at right now with the October of 2025 and TBD going forward, but, like, I've told my friend, I was like, "I wanna sit with this in November once all the episodes are out and I'm not like, you know, pressing all the, scheduling and social media-ing to really step back, and reflect and I don't know, maybe get into the mountains more and do that."
That sounds amazing. That sounds amazing. So happy
Yeah.
for you.
Well, it's aspirational. We'll see. We'll see. Fingers crossed.
You'll get there. You'll get there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm sure our listeners and the audience would resonate deeply with a lot of what you said too. Some of us are still struggling. And it does come to that point of choosing freedom for yourself,
Mm,
making that or creating that relationship, that personal relationship. And it seems like maybe that relationship is still in development for you. And that's okay, That's perfectly fine, because at the same time, we're not supposed to be set at a certain time, like nobody,
mhm.
we're so infinite in that way, right? That we keep going, even
Yeah.
from an energy standpoint, right? Like
Mm,
energy is not destroyed or, created, but it just moves, it just transfers, So the same energy has been here since the beginning. And that is something that we don't talk about inside the church, but outside, it seems like that's one of those things that we stumble upon first, these principles and ideas and even language of energy, astrology, numerology.
mm,
And all the religions have mystic
mhm,
versions of themselves that
mhm.
condone and support and even teach these things. So I always find that very interesting. Like you said, Andor, you know.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was definitely a revelation to me several years ago when I was well, more than a decade ago when I was just starting to deconstruct where I realized, oh, there are a lot of different ways to be Christian than what I had thought. So that was a great starting point and I'm so grateful for all the voices that have come before, Christian and otherwise, and have been bold, to share their journeys in progress.
Yeah, definitely. Talking about boldness, this audio drama is very bold. Her memoirs, very bold. Her testimonies are bold. And we just are so deeply appreciative and honored to be able to experience it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And can't wait for the rest of the world to experience it in its entirety. I definitely do believe that it's very important. Maybe there's a small voice somewhere saying that it's not, but it is
Mm,
because, your experiences, her experiences, they matter.
mm,
The more we start to share, the more we start to see, the more we start to understand.
Mm.
And that's the biggest part, is just understanding.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, audio drama is such an intimate medium. For those listening who haven't heard it, like, it's definitely, like, worth it's a it's you don't really think it would be, I think, because you can't see it, there's no visuals. For a while, I described it as a movie without the pictures, and it really is that, like, kind of engaging. You almost feel like you could I once played a scene for someone. They're like, "Oh, I can't wait to watch it." And I'm like, "Well, you just did." But so it has that intimacy where I feel like you can connect to characters, like, really deeply. And as someone who grew up with this medium, done very highly produced, I learned its potential. And I'm just so grateful for the author being willing to sort of, like, trust me with her story and kind of adapting it in a completely new way. And I hope that people who listen, hear their story represented in a new way, and that it creates empathy, that it creates, like, opportunities for understanding other people's stories and just engaging with it. Like, those are the 2, I think, biggest things when people ask me, like, who do you hope listens and what do you hope people get out of it? It's that conversation and that just, like, feeling less alone.
Powerful. My biggest suggestion would be close your eyes and listen to it. That's how we experienced it. And for me, we started filling in the blanks. Like, from hearing
Yeah.
it, we could visualize a scene, you know?
Yeah. It's so incredible to me because even though I was in the studio and I edited and mixed it, still now when I listen to it, I picture the setting and I don't picture the studio. And that's wild to me that it works on me too. And at the listening party that I had, I, like, actually provided, like, eye masks for people, if they did wanna, like, really kinda shut out the visual, because and some people did. And so it's yeah, definitely something to engage, like, if you can engage with it and close your eyes, like, that would be really that.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That's awesome. All right. Well, I think that wraps up, our conversation for today. I want to respect time. Thank you so much for sharing your time and, sharing your thoughts and opinions and experiences. Really deeply appreciated. Did you have any last thoughts, comments?
Well, thank you so much for having me first. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate the ways in which, like, kind of sharing this and talking about Addie's story has helped me reflect more on my own. I think I kind of knew that would happen, and I'm really grateful for it because I think it's just is beneficial to do that. But yeah, I mean, um, it's I guess, it's on all the podcast apps right now, and I think I've been very much in a because it's a short series, this is not an ongoing podcast where it'll, still be airing new episodes next year, but it will all be out there next year too. And so it's not something you have to engage with, like, right now. It'll be there. It'll be there when you find it and when you're ready for it too. And so wanted to have that reminder too, because, like, we talked about there can be elements that are triggering, right? There can be elements that, like, maybe now is not the time for you to engage with this part of the story or this kind of story, but maybe there will come a time. And so, you know, story if things find us when we're ready for them. At least I hope so. So I think that's probably what I would leave off with is that it was an incredible privilege to tell this story, and it's thing I'm most proud of that I've made, and the thing that feels is most meaningful personally that I've made so far, in my life. And, you know, I'm excited for it to keep finding its people.